Well, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for being here. And we're really happy to have you for our second episode of the Clements Library Virtual Discovery Series on photography. Today, we'll be talking about copies and manipulations in 19th century photography. If you haven't yet, please take the poll, and it's great if you can introduce yourself in the chat. Be sure to select all panelists and attendees so that we can get to know each other better in this community. All right, so I just want to check. So this is the poll that we're going to take a look at in just a minute. I see that there's still a lot of people signing in, so I'll give you one more minute to participate in the poll. But in the meantime, I'll tell you that the Virtual Discover Series is brought to you by the William L. Clements Library on the campus of the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And we're featuring our graphics division at the Clements Library. The graphics division is comprised of materials of many genres and formats. The collection is curated to support the overall subject strengths found in the other collections, the books, the manuscripts, and the maps, as well as offering unique research opportunities in American visual culture. So the bulk of the graphics collection, the holdings are prints and photographs, and then supplemented with original artwork, printed ephemera, sheet music, and other visual materials. So I'm going to introduce our two speakers today. We have Louis Miller, who began working at the Clements Library in April of 2015 as an intern for the processing of the Henry Birkbeck papers while pursuing his MSI at the University of Michigan School of Information. He currently splits his time between reader services and the graphics division. Jacob Dopp has been at the Clements Library since 2017 and works as a cataloger in the graphics division, as well as supporting research activities. So, Louis and Jacob, welcome. Tell us a little bit about how it is that you came to focus on this particular topic for our Virtual Discover series.
Sure, I'll go first. This is something that I think Jacob and I have a shared interest in. For me personally, it comes from working at the Clements Library with photo collections, mostly the David V. Tinder collection of Michigan photography, particularly working with the cabinet photographs and carte de visite photographs, two paper photograph formats from the 19th century. I've gone through about 20 to 30,000 of these images at least, in my time at the Clements, and sometimes in chunks. There was a project that I was doing where I was adding photographers to an index we had. So I went through every single photo in the collection in the span of about a week. Doing that sort of like deep dive into that much material, you just start noticing patterns emerge. You start noticing commonalities, and you also start noticing the real amazing sort of like one-off, whoa, haven't seen that before. And while those sort of whoa moments are things that I like and are a fun part of my job, it's actually the commonalities that are more interesting to me as a researcher and as an archivist. Why are these things getting reproduced in mass? What's the reasons behind that? What are the cultural reasons behind that? So for me personally, it's been working with tens of thousands of photographs from the 19th century. The copies and manipulations you're going to hear us talk about, these are things that we just come across in our day-to-day work. And when you have more of a trained eye, when you're going through it enough times, you really start noticing some really interesting examples.
Great. Jacob?
Yeah, great response, Louis. I think the way I approach it has been from a similar angle, also working closely with the photographic collections in the graphics division, namely the Tinder collection and the Richard Pohrt Jr. collection of Native American photography. Again, pouring over thousands of images day after day, you're going to start noticing some patterns. You're going to start picking up on some things. One of the things that interested me the most over the course of this research was noticing just how many photographs bear some indication of a manipulation of some sort, be it, the photographer has an entire image staged completely, say of Native American subjects who he's given studio props, etc., or actual darkroom manipulations such as photo retouching or multiple exposure, literally to concoct an image. Because they say the camera never lies. I was always told this growing up, but lo and behold, I started working at the Clements and delving into the photo collections. You discover that the camera and the photographer themselves, they lie quite often for various reasons. Could just be simple artistic ingenuity. Someone wants to show off their skills, or more often than not, there's an economic purpose behind what they're doing. They are trying to sell images.
Right. Okay, great. Well, I can't wait to see the examples that you today. All right, so thank you everybody for participating in the poll. I'm going to go ahead and end that and share the results now. And traditional film with flash bulbs is winning with 47% of the people saying that was their first camera. But plenty of people with the built-in flash as well. And less of us had the first camera with one of the more recent devices. So I'm curious what the other is, and some of you may be sharing that in chat, and I'm not quite able to keep up on it while I'm talking, but I'll take a look in a minute. So, all right, thanks everybody for sharing that. All right, I have a couple of comments to help the time go smoothly. Chat is a great way to communicate with all of us, but it also goes by very quickly, and it's hard to keep track of questions that are posed in there for the panelists. So if you go to the Q&A section, you're able to ask a question there. You type your question into the Q&A box and hit send, and that will make it appear. You can also go there and see what questions other people have asked. And if you click the thumbs up icon to like a comment, this helps us know which questions are maybe the most popular, because it will resort them so that the most popular is at the top. You can also add to a question if you have more of a comment on it, if you have an answer about it. So to do that, click comment, and then you can write a reply to an existing question, and your comment will appear right beneath that question. We'll also try to keep an eye on things and indicate what we'll be answering live so that we can prioritize it a little bit. And but we hope you have lots of questions, and we'll have a great conversation. In addition, last week, I know there were a lot of questions about how to check what you're seeing on the screen. And we did some practicing, because our intention is for you to see the presentation full screen so that you can really get a good look at these photos without the distraction of any of us showing up. So hopefully this will help with that. There's a little icon up at the top that lets you switch between the video feed and the screen share. So just in case that's clicked, you can click back and forth to test it out. I know some people were only seeing me at one point last week, so hopefully that is helpful. And then there's also this option of side-by-side mode that you may or may not have on right now. And if you drag, you can drag your screen so that the video of this panelist goes away, or hopefully you can also right click on us if we're showing up and have us go away. So I'm going to hide my video so only my picture should show, if anything, so that I'm not distracting you. But we're hoping that we figured it all out and that there will be sound when I start to play it. Okay, so enjoy the presentation by Louie and Jacob, and then at the end, we'll answer your questions, and it'll be great. Here we go.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for listening to this Clements Library Photo History Talk. Today, we are going to take a quick look at the duplication and manipulation of 19th century photographs, mostly focusing on paper prints from glass negatives. My name is Louis Miller, and I work with the visual materials at the Clements Library. My colleague Jacob Dopp and I will be leading you through this presentation. Before we begin, I would like you all to think about a time where you have changed the format of something in order to preserve it or share it with a wider group of people. Have any of you converted family videos on VHS to DVD? Or scanned an old school photograph in order to share it on Facebook? Let's just say we were not the first people to have this thought. Our desire to share and reproduce content was also felt by our 19th century forebears. Daguerreotypes, the first popular widespread photographic phenomenon, were created on a one-to-one basis. You got your daguerreotype plate with your likeness on it, and that was it. If you wanted another image, the photographer had to insert another photosensitive metal plate into their camera. Unless, of course, you asked the photographer to take a daguerreotype of the daguerreotype. This desire to reproduce and copy images exploded when albumin paper photographs, mostly made in a small format known as cartes de visite, became widespread circa 1860. All of a sudden, if you wanted a copy of Great Aunt Sarah's daguerreotype, you could take it down to the local photographer, have them photograph it onto a glass plate negative, and then have dozens of cartes de visite made from the same negative. The ability to copy older formats of photography onto newer paper photographs became widespread, with certain photographers even boasting in their advertisements of their skill at such reproductions. When larger paper photographs, known as cabinet photographs, became popular starting in the 1870s, cartes de visite were reproduced in this new format. All of the images in front of you now are cabinet photographs taken by Ypsilanti photographer George E. Waterman, most likely during the early 1890s. All of these photographs are copies of earlier 19th century photographic formats. I'm not sure about you, but I had no idea about this phenomenon when I started working at the Clements. However, the more I came across examples such as these, the more it made absolute sense. Of course they did this. We do it too. This is the 19th century equivalent of digitizing an old family scrapbook from World War II. Here is another example. This is Horace Eaton from our Eaton-Shirley family papers. As you can see on this slide, the daguerreotype image of Eaton on the left was reproduced some 20 years later in carte de visite format. However, images were not copied only for personal reasons. The ability to mass-produce paper prints from glass negatives could also influence popular opinion. One of the reasons Abraham Lincoln won the election of 1860 was his embrace of the carte de visite format while on the campaign trail. The Clements Library has hundreds of these carte de visite images of Lincoln. As you can see on the right, the invention of these paper photographs led to the creation of the photograph album. I cannot tell you how many family albums from the 19th century contain an image of Lincoln. This image is from our Arabella Chapman collection, a set of albums kept by an African-American woman from 1878 through the 1890s. It is no accident that Arabella Chapman decided to include Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, and John Brown in her albums alongside friends and family. The relative ease with which paper photographs could be copied led to a shift in public opinion about the issue of slavery and emancipation during the Civil War. When the Union Army captured New Orleans, photographs of white slaves were taken, with their images appearing in Harper's Weekly and disseminated in carte de visite format across the North. These light-skinned slaves horrified a Northern public, who sadly were not as likely to take umbrage at the issue of slavery when faced with images of darker-skinned individuals. This new photographic process ensured that these images reached an audience at a rate exponentially higher than any other process that had come before. Needless to say, the new ability to mass-produce photographs also led to an explosion in visual popular culture and the cult of celebrity. Edwin Booth, brother of the infamous John Wilkes Booth, was one of the most well-respected actors of his day, staying popular even after his brother's treachery. In a strange twist of fate, he also saved Robert Todd Lincoln's life a year or so before Lincoln's assassination. Images of Edwin Booth and other performers were very popular and appear throughout the Clements' collections. Blurring the line between entertainer and sideshow attraction were these images of General Tom Thumb and his wife Lavinia Warren, both of whom worked as performers for P.T. Barnum. Some of the most popular reproduced photographs of the 19th century were images of people with abnormal physical attributes. Little people, people with albinism, gigantism, or obesity were all popular subjects. The ability to copy and mass-produce photographs also allowed for lighthearted entertainment in the form of visual illusion. I first came across the image on the right while working on a British military family's album from the 1860s and 1870s. Neither I nor my boss Clayton Lewis had any idea what we were looking at. Could it be a disfigured soldier from the Crimean War? Let's just say I was shocked then to see this image on the left show up in our David V. Tinder collection of Michigan photography. Why was this image being reproduced? Well, as you can see, and to my great embarrassment, by simply rotating the photograph, it became clear that this was a sleeping dog, not a disfigured face. Though, from the manuscript inscription on the image's verso, you can tell I wasn't the first person to be duped by this. There is something quite remarkable about falling for a trick that was first done 150 years ago. It turns out this photograph of the dog originated in Liverpool, England, and within a few years had made its way across the Atlantic to places like Bay City, Michigan. Quite remarkable, but not surprising when you realize how the invention of paper photographs from glass negatives made it quick and easy to copy and share images of all types. My colleague Jacob Dopp is now going to walk you through another fascinating aspect of 19th century photography: manipulation.
Photographers of the 19th century engaged in a wide variety of manipulations that enabled them to modify images for both artistic and commercial purposes. For early photographic formats such as daguerreotypes, ambrotypes, and tintypes, this included applying hand-painted color, usually in the form of rose-tinted cheeks or golden jewelry. The beautiful silver tones in this daguerreotype from the David V. Tinder collection, however, were not achieved by simply applying a few touches of paint. Instead, the photographer here chiseled directly into the surface of the daguerreotype in order to expose the silver beneath. Does everyone remember our good friend Horace Eaton, whose daguerreotype was copied into carte de visite format? If you look closely at the magnified view at far right, you can clearly see that in the carte de visite version, one of Horace's pupils has been darkened by hand. This subtle mark was made directly onto the negative image plate during a process called retouching. Retouching involved modifying the image-bearing emulsion side of a glass plate negative using specialized tools and equipment, and was often requested by customers hoping to have their likenesses perfected. Removing wrinkles from faces and trimming body outlines to make people appear thinner were among the most commonly requested touch-ups. Throughout the 19th century, there was a lucrative market for photographs of foreign peoples. In the United States, this included photos of Native Americans. To maximize appeal to a predominantly white customer base, many photographers manipulated images of Native Americans to make them appear as stereotypically exotic as possible. For example, this carte de visite of Santee Dakota Chief Tatanka from the Richard Pohrt Jr. collection exhibits an extraordinary amount of retouching. The feather headdress in particular appears to have been almost entirely illustrated onto the glass plate negative. Some photographers even provided studio props and clothing for Native American subjects. The portrait at left was taken in Denver sometime in the late 1860s. The subject, Chief Johnson of the White River Utes, wears a mixture of Western and traditional clothing while also holding a calumet pipe, embroidered tobacco bag, and what appears to be a staff affixed with human scalps. However, while researching this photograph, I was surprised to find the exact same scalp lock staff present in a different photograph. Clearly, this was a studio prop that belonged to the photographer, not the subject. The hyperactivity of infants and children was a challenge for many photographers and could often lead to disappointingly blurred images. One solution to this common plight was to have a parent, often wearing a clever disguise, hold their child in place while the photo was being taken. In fact, if you look closely at the picture on your left, you'll find that the oddly shaped black chair in which the baby is seated is actually a parent draped in a blanket. At right, we see a portrait of a disgruntled girl in which nearly the entire backdrop has been whited out. This was most likely done during the retouching process in order to hide the presence of a parent who was standing directly behind the child in the background. Portraits like these have fittingly come to be known as hidden mother photographs. The ghostly figures floating in these images are prime examples of a phenomenon called spirit photography. These ghoulish apparitions were mostly produced using a technique called multiple exposure, which involved exposing glass plate negatives to more than one instance of light. While the basic principles of multiple exposure were understood from 1850 onwards, plenty of people were nonetheless convinced that spirit photographs were 100% authentic. Many practitioners of spirit photography performed a double act of sorts, playing the role of both psychic medium as well as photographer. They would call upon any spirits that a customer wished to contact before subsequently arranging a portrait. After the initial photograph was taken, faint, ghost-like images of human faces could then be superimposed at the photographer's discretion by briefly re-exposing the negative. Lo and behold, when the final product was revealed upon the customer's return, a hovering specter or two would miraculously appear in the background. Some photographers mastered multiple exposure to an extraordinary degree, allowing them to produce images that at times seemingly defied reality. Evidenced by this humorous example from the early 1890s, Abel J. Whalen excelled in creating complex multiple exposure arrangements that he called freak photographs. Each and every figure in this gentleman of the jury courtroom scene was portrayed by the same long-bearded fellow, who was actually thought to be Mr. Whalen himself. In order to create this image, it would have taken no fewer than 14 carefully coordinated exposures, not to mention additional editing during the retouching process. The end result, after all this meticulous work, as you can see, is quite remarkable. This concludes today's presentation on 19th century photographic copies and manipulations. We hope you've all thoroughly enjoyed it.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much. So which of the photographs that you presented is your favorite?
Okay, I'll go first. It's actually on Jacob's slides. He took this one from me. One of the spirit photographs, the one on the, I think that's on the far right, a woman with a male spirit behind her, is taken by Mrs. Helen F. Stewart, who there's a lot of information about kind of the early era of spirit photography that I won't go into, but basically this one guy, William Mumler, has gotten the credit for sort of inventing spirit photos and sort of being the most well-known spirit photographer. But he actually started working in Helen F. Stewart's studio. And Helen F. Stewart, there's an article that recently was published about her and sort of making the case for her having a larger impact on spirit photography than has previously been given credit for. So that one in particular, because on the back of the photo, usually, you have a photographer's stamp, and oftentimes it'll say things like negatives preserved for a year, and in case you wanted to go back and get more photos of your aunt. The back of this spirit photo says hair jewelry made to order, and hair jewelry was one of the biggest mourning practices of the 19th century in America at the time, where you take the hair of deceased loved ones and sort of send it to one of these places where they could turn it into a kind of ornamental piece of jewelry that you could wear. You're like wearing, a lost loved one's, hair to remind yourself of them. It sounds weird to us, but it was very common back then. The fact that Helen F. Stewart is advertising that she's doing hair jewelry on the back of her spirit photos is fascinating to me. And I mean, I'm kind of cynical about this. I think Jacob and I both take a view of the sort of economic over the artistic. And I just think that she saw spirit photos, the possibility to make some more money like she was with her hair jewelry, making money off of mourning. It's very interesting.
That is really interesting. What about you, Jacob? What's your favorite?
If I had to pick one that was included in this presentation, it'd probably be the portrait of Chief Johnson holding the scalp lock staff, just because, you know, that image raises a lot of questions regards to Native American photography in general. A lot of things I encountered cataloging the Richard Pohrt Jr. collection of Native American photography were scenarios just like that, where you ostensibly, if you take everything at face value, here you have this very carefully curated image of a Native American individual that was designed for an audience that expected them to look a certain way.
Right.
And so they're feeding into these and reinforcing these stereotypes over time. And so that aspect popped up again and again and again over the course of working on the Pohrt collection. And this one really stood out because, you know, I took it at face value initially. I couldn't find anything disproving, you know, that this, you know, was this gentleman's staff. I think I ended up, I kind of hit a dead end. I couldn't find anything more. I was doing research, and so I decided just to try. I took a picture of it on my phone, and then I did a reverse Google image search lookup. And then lo and behold, that other image came up, the one that came from Pinterest. And then my jaw just dropped. I was like, oh my God, this is like, you can clearly see that this is, it's almost like it's on a display stand. You see the square base of the stand at the bottom. It's like, this is totally a studio prop that the photographer just said, here you go. Handed it to him, snapped his picture, and then sold it as, you know, portraying this guy as being a certain way.
Right.
And it just speaks to a larger issue with 19th century photography of Native Americans. It's a subject I'm very interested in currently, and trying to do a lot of research into this. It's very complicated. It's very depressing at times, but I think it's really important to fully grasp the reality of, you know, the context in which a lot of these images were produced.
Right. And next week, when people join us, that's what you'll be talking about.
Exactly. So no more on that front.
Sherry, though, has a related question. How can a researcher take these techniques into consideration to accurately interpret historic photos?
You want to go first,
Great
Jacob?
question. Sure. The patience is key, and not jumping to conclusions about something. You know, with these Native American photographs, a lot of times you'll have accompanying information that comes with them, inscriptions on the back or captions that the photographer put down. And you really need to be careful to really assess all that information, verify it, make sure it's accurate. And that goes also for more run-of-the-mill photographs as well. When I was working on cataloging the cased images in the David Tinder collection, this is another issue that came up of, you have photos that were paired with cases where sometimes the inscriptions didn't really make sense given what the photo was. And so you just really, really need to comb over every last vestige of an image and any associated information with it to make sure that everything actually makes sense, everything lines up. And again, like Lou and I were saying at the beginning of this, we have the added advantage of having viewed literally thousands upon thousands of photographs at the Clements. And having that capacity to do that has really helped inform our critical eye for how we judge these photos. So just, yeah, the more you look at these examples, the more you see, the more you put together, the better idea you're going to have of being able to assess them.
Yeah, and I would just, add, because Jacob nails it, is just like, you don't want to go to the opposite extreme and then also say none of this can be trusted. And I can just immediately say that all 19th century photography is a lie, whatever a lie means. It's not a lie. They're manipulating photographs for various reasons. So I guess you just got to approach each image with a really critical eye. And like Jacob said, the advantage that we have is looking at thousands of these. And I mean, I would recommend the same sort of thing. You should not be looking at a 19th century photograph in a vacuum. You need to look at other photographs produced by that photographer or of similar topics. That's going to give you a better sense than of is this really special, or is this actually just how they were doing things?
Great, thank you. Thanks so much. We have a question from Roger. We featured some photographs by the Ypsilanti photographer Waterman, and they're wondering if you know if there's a family connection to Waterman Jim.
So I have to admit, I didn't have this in the top of my head. I was debating whether to pretend that. When I saw that question come in, the Bentley Historical Library, which is another archive on campus, has this resource that's sort of like a historic tour of the U of M campus. And so it'll talk about buildings that were previously there that are not there anymore. And Waterman Gym is one of these. It is no connection with George E. Waterman. It's connected with a wealthy Detroit businessman named Joshua W. Waterman, who gave $20,000 for the building of it on the condition that it was matched by other donors. So I wish there was more of a connection, but there isn't. But for people interested in learning more about the sort of past U of M buildings and what they cost, who they were built by, check out the Bentley's kind of virtual campus tour. You should be able to locate it on their website.
All right, thank you. Doug Johnson is asking if we see many instances of manipulation of buildings or other inanimate objects.
The one that I've seen more than any other, I guess, is sort of memorial photos. These aren't post-mortem photos of the deceased body. They are sort of again, very popular, and it seems even more so in the sort of cabinet photograph era of 1870s or 1890s, like these floral arrangements, often with the name of the deceased, like spelled out in flowers, or you can presume it was probably at the funeral. At least that's like what I assume. These often, or at least I've seen 3 or 4 examples in Tinder where a photographer has manipulated the floral arrangement to include a photo of the person. And I've seen this done in 3 different ways. I've seen it literally physically cut out of a different paper print and glued on top of the other paper print. I've seen it done via like a negative multiple exposure. I'm trying to think, Jacob, was there any other, was there another version of that we had found?
Nothing comes to mind.
Okay, so that's the biggest one for me, besides the sort of practical like if you want to call it manipulation of, you're trying to do a photo of a town and you're sort of stitching together 5 photographs. You'll see sometimes there like a kind of physical manipulation of cutting the prints and making sure that they line up with each other. But those are really the only ones that jump to mind for me with buildings. I'm not sure, Jacob, if you have any other.
Yeah, I can't say that I've come across any instance of buildings being modified in any way. Like, I mean, the closest thing I can think of to that would be just having these illustrated backdrops that you see in a lot of portraits, where sometimes you'll have, entire like living room scenes or a town scene in the back, or they're outside on a farm. But in terms of actively manipulating images of a building or an inanimate object, that's interesting. I'll need to keep my eyes peeled for that from now on. So maybe we'll have an answer for you later down the line.
All right, thank you. Before we
also,
get,
Angela, I saw there was, I saw someone, Martha, was asking about if the catalog record for the photo of Chief Johnson includes information about the scalp lock staff being a prop. It does. I made sure over the course of cataloging these images that when I found discrepancies like this, studio props, etc., or someone being misidentified as someone who they aren't, I made sure to include that information in the catalog record so that these inaccuracies are not perpetuated, at least from our end, as long as it's under our control. That's something that we'll definitely strive to achieve.
Great, thank you. I saw that, oh, I lost it. Somebody, there it is. Oh, Louis marked it as answering live, but before we get too far away from, wait, did we already? I'm getting confused. Did we talk about spirit photographs since we started the Q&A? Maybe we haven't, but are there any books about spirit photographs?
So there is a book that's sort of more of a compilation of primary sources about William H. Mumler, who's the real sort of main spirit photographer that's well documented. This is by Lewis Kaplan. I can make sure I'll put this in the chat in a second. The other book that I can recommend more broadly on American spiritualism, but also with a great chapter on spirit photography, is actually a former Clements manuscript curator, Rob Cox, who was a manuscript curator in the 1990s. He has a book called Body and Soul, A Sympathetic History of American Spiritualism. And one of the chapters in that is remarkable, and I think personally the best sort of analysis of spirit photography I've seen. I can link to both of those books in the chat. Also, at the same time, I figured I might as well answer the one about whether women, that was sort of what I was mentioning with Helen F. Stewart, is that she's really the female spirit photographer that I'm aware of. The only other two that really I know of well in American sense, there's a French photographer as well, I'm blanking on the name of, are both men. So Mumler, though, who sort of took the credit as being the main propagator of this sort of spirit photography, is directly connected with his wife. So he's also connected with Helen F. Stewart, but he's connected with his wife, Mrs. Mumler, who is a medium. She often will go into the studio when he hasn't had success at getting the spirit to show up. She'll then talk to the person, either like through the dead, like the voice of the dead person. But so Mrs. Mumler, as more of a traditional medium, was involved in the creation of these photographs. I think, like Jacob said in his presentation, all of these spirit photographers are mediums. I mean, they're claiming that they have no control over this. They are just the messengers. They're just the vessel. They're not doing this on their own volition. I don't personally believe that. As you probably guessed, I'm pretty cynical about these photos. But it is really interesting. It's really interesting to look at as a historical phenomenon. I think these photographers all saw themselves as mediums.
Interesting. All right, thank you. Another book question. Do we have any outside resources that we could recommend to help people determine whether an image is what it appears to be? So maybe a book about these kinds of manipulations?
I know Clayton might be the one to ask about that. Not sure offhand, a good source to point people in the direction of. Louis, I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, no, nothing comes to mind specifically. Clayton, probably, would be the best bet for that. But I will say that, you can get a lot of information out of just sort of general reference books. One of the ones that I was recommended by Clayton when I first started was, it's just called like 19th Century Photography. I think the editor is Martha Sandweiss. That's a fantastic collection of essays that'll really make you understand and contextualize 19th century American photography in a way that you otherwise wouldn't.
Okay, thanks. So Lisa's asking, what about combination printing? There are a lot of those showing landscapes and set pieces composed of multiple photos.
I guess I want to look at the question. Angela, is it on the list?
It's on the list.
On the Q&A.
Yeah. Let's see. From who again? Sorry about this. Oh, what about combination?
Yes.
Well, so I guess Jacob touched on like the double negative. You can do a double negative or a double exposure, or print on the same paper, print different negatives. They're on different parts of the print. So I'm not sure if that's what you're referencing. There's also sort of some of my favorite are these composite photographs you'll see. So you'll see like a class photo of 18, and I think Clayton mentioned this in his presentation last week briefly. But you'll see like a class photo of the class of 1865 at U of M. And it'll just be that the photographer tacked up a bunch of carte de visites on the wall and took a photo of those photos. Jake, I'm not sure if you have any other ways of answering
Yeah,
that?
so no, there's actually a really interesting example of this that I've come across during my own personal research into photographs related to the Sundance and the 4th of July celebrations. Make a very long, complicated story short. In the 1880s, the United States government began outlawing certain cultural practices of Native Americans, including the Sundance, which is one of the most sacred ceremonies of tribes of the Great Plains. And so there was kind of a mad rush for, quote, authentic photos of the Sundance, before it is, driven out of existence. And one photo that I came across that ostensibly shows a Sundancer at the dance pole in front of an audience, at first glance, kind of seems to tick all the boxes of being an actual image of a Sundance transpiring. The closer you look at this image, first of all, the Sundancer at center is actually completely fabricated. It was totally drawn onto the negative image plate. And then I also was amazed to find that there's actually huge sections of the audience that were cut out, literally cut out from prints that this photographer had taken of related ceremonies for whatever event he was photographing. And he superimposed these cutouts to make this new image. So it's a brand new composite image that is in some ways a complete fabrication. And that's probably the most outrageous example that I've come across of this kind of composite combination photograph.
Great, thank you.
Also, Roger has a question about our beards. Are they the result of COVID sequestering? I don't know about you, Louis, but absolutely for me. I think within like the first week or two of being on lockdown, started to get a little bit stir crazy. So I shaved everything off, and then I have not touched it since then. So until we're back in the building, I'm just gonna let it grow. So
Yeah,
we'll see how that turns out.
Yeah, watch out. Tune in for the photo history in 3 months, and you'll see our Abbey Road beards.
I'll start to look like Abel J. Whalen.
That's right. Hey, we can recreate that photo. Yeah, both the hair and the beard. I decided to shave off all the hair and on the top of the head and let the rest of it grow wild. So we're seeing how long I put up with this and my wife puts up with this.
All right. Let's see. Oh, another question about the alterations and what kinds of groupings you see. Sherry says, you mentioned alterations to Native American portraits to please an audience and altered portraits to please the subject. What other patterns have you noticed in categories or types of photos more prone to alteration?
Excellent question. Do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I'm trying to think alteration. I guess one of the things that I find the most interesting is the sort of retouching of personal portraits to make people look younger, remove wrinkles, make people thinner. You do start seeing patterns where you can kind of tell when somebody's been airbrushed, which is interesting because you realize that it's not just like a commercial. The commercial motivation. It's the same for when you're taking portrait photos of the people in the studio as it is for selling native photos to some extent. I mean, again, you're trying to please. The difference, the main difference being that the photos of the Native Americans aren't for the Native Americans. They're for a Euro-American audience. But with the photographer doing it with the portrait sitter in his local studio, he's also just doing it because the sitter wants that. It's usually that.
Usually, or the artist just really wants to really kind of express his artistic capabilities, and is just basically showing off. I know there were some photographers who were kind of more purists about retouching, and they felt that some people went way overboard, which I totally sympathize with that, because sometimes you come across retouchings that are just like, it looks like a 5-year-old just scribbled on this. But some people actually went so far as to say that, yeah, like I try to avoid retouching at all costs because it strips away some of the character of the subject. It just kind of, it waters down the image and it makes it less personal.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. So Jim Davis is asking, if I remember correctly, Brady and perhaps Sullivan repositioned bodies at Gettysburg to increase the dramatic features of slain soldiers. Do you know of other instances when this was done during the war?
So the Gettysburg examples that you mentioned are famous, and Clayton is a great resource on this sort of manipulation of Civil War photos. I can't think off the top of my head, if like Gardner did it as well. I would, from my gut, say yes. I think that they were all posing photos, making bodies, dragging a body somewhere else, making it look more dramatic or tragic. But one of the things that I've found so interesting, and it's been brought up as a sort of like thing to ponder by Clayton, is we would say to those photographers, "You're lying. You're purposefully like manipulating this and lying about it." And his point, and I think it's a great one, is they would probably say that no, we're not. We're actually telling a better truth. Like the idea of truth is different. Like they're saying, we're actually showing you how awful this war is. By making this photo that much more tragic and sad, we're actually getting at the truth of the war. And it's just something I never thought about before he said that. And I totally buy into it. Yeah, I don't know, Jacob, do you have any other examples, like specific examples?
There's not from the Civil War, but there's an example of, from the Indian Wars. There's an example of a soldier, a Welsh American named Frederick Williams. It's Williams spelled with Y's instead of I's. And there's a famous photograph of Williams after he had been killed during a battle, and his body was completely stripped of all clothing, and it was ritually mutilated by the Native Americans who he had encountered in battle. Long story short, there's a photograph of his body that's totally riddled with arrows. It's pretty grotesque, but there are some interesting hypotheses around that photo and just to what degree it was staged, because there's indications that the first-hand report of his death was that he fell alongside his horse, literally right beside it. Of course, in this photo, there's no horse anywhere near in sight. Also, the ground around him, you would figure it'd be, there'd be blood pooling everywhere. There's no darkening of blood anywhere next to his body. And so I remember coming across a really interesting examination of this photo online that kind of called into question the veracity of some of the claims of the photo. And it's pretty intriguing. But like I said, it's pretty disturbing as well. So definitely, if you're faint of heart or the queasy stomach, I would not recommend looking at that photo.
Angela, before we move on, I saw that Len in the comments had mentioned Muybridge and the Kate and Robert Johnson photograph album we have at the library, which is a photo album commissioned by a wealthy San Franciscan couple by Muybridge, the famous photographer who's sort of considered the father of the motion picture for his studies of animal and human locomotion. But he worked as a photographer for the rich of San Francisco to make a living. This album is incredible. Like Len says, there's spirit images in them, but not because they're spiritualists. At least I'm pretty positive that is like an aesthetic thing only and done at the request of the Johnsons, not Muybridge. But I mean, that's all just my theory. I will say that album is incredible, and when the library is back open, you should come in and look at it. One of the weirdest asides to this is that the woman in the album, Kate Johnson, she owned, maybe not 100, but close to it, Angora cats. And she, in the 1890s, had a gigantic painting of most of her cats commissioned. And this was just recently sold for something like, $800,000. It's absolutely incredible. If you look up my wife and her lovers, or something, my wife's lovers, it's the name of the title. It's a sort of joke title they think that was given by her husband because, her true love were all of her cats. Do some digging for Kate Johnson and cats, and you will find some weird things on the internet. It's definitely worth checking out.
All right. Interesting. So let's see. We have another question about spirit photography from Ivan. Have you ever seen a spirit photo by Isaac Wren of Philadelphia? He said he's seen an Ambro type spirit likely taken in the 1850s.
I have not seen that, and I would, if you could please link to the Amber type you're referencing, I would love to see that, because most of the arguments that even scholars are making now is that most of the spirit photography requires a negative. I mean, it doesn't necessarily, but the Amber type is a process that doesn't need a negative. It's like the daguerreotype. It's a one-to-one process. So if you can please share a link or any information with Jacob and I know we'd be interested in seeing that, and that would further my knowledge about spirit photography. So please send that along if you have it.
Right. And I don't know if you'll know the answer to this one, but was spirit photography also popular in the UK at this time?
Definitely UK spiritualists interacted with spirit photos as well. And again, I mentioned a French photographer, and I had the book right next to me. I could look it up. There was a French photographer that was also doing spirit photography. I'm sure there are others, but that's all I know of. But if you do some digging and find out more, please let me know.
Great. Doug is saying, let's see, Harris Montgomery of Hartford, Wisconsin made a great real photo postcard, circa 1910, in which he skillfully added skyscrapers of small towns in Michigan as well as Wisconsin. That's
And
cool.
I'll need to see these.
Yes,
That's awesome, Doug.
we need to see those. That's very cool. All right.
Yeah, gosh, we have to have examples of this. Like we once we're back in.
Yeah, once we get back in, we'll have to go. Yep.
Okay, so Ivan says he's going to try to find the picture of the Wren Ambro type, so that's exciting.
Right, thank you, Ivan.
Yeah, thank you.
And do we have photos that combine several images to tell a story?
In one singular image or a series of related photos? Because we definitely have several series, I think mostly stereo view series, that were meant to be viewed in succession, so it tells a narrative story.
Yes, and often these are like humorous. One of the common themes is sort of the Irish maid or the African American maid, depending on which series it is, where sort of the husband is cheating on his wife with the pretty maid, and so the wife catches them and then decides to hire a really ugly Irish maid, or fill in the racial stereotype that you want to use. Those, we definitely have those. Yeah, photos where a single photo tells a story. Not that I can think of. We have some great photo examples of sort of like comic drawings. The thing I mentioned at the very beginning of this, when maybe some of you weren't on yet, when we were talking with Angela more informally, the kind of put your head behind a like cutout where then the image is something else. I've definitely seen like the 1860s equivalent of that, where they're doing like a joke, sort of like person on a buggy, and then the face is massive, and so there's definitely that sort of like combining of drawing with photography to maybe tell a humorous joke or image. Jacob, actually, we were talking about this the other day. One of the ones, again, it's not combining images, but that's so interesting and kind of is a retouching, one of these negative retouching examples, is a It's a shard of glass from a fire that happened in Benton Harbor, Michigan. I think 1889. I might be wrong in the year. Killed over a dozen firefighters who were trying to battle this blaze. The negative is it's a picture of part of the glass of the building. But the photographer has taken and painted on all the names of the deceased. So it's like another type of memorial photography. It blows my mind. I'm sure there are other examples out there. And one day maybe you'll see us do a presentation on like memorial photography in particular.
Wow, that's cool. It seems like we have answered the questions. Do either of you have any last thoughts before we sign off?
I'm just, again, I said this last week, we're not sure, everything's up in the air. We're all going through this together, but, I just want to encourage you all to think of the Clements Library as a resource you can and should use. We have amazing materials from a wide variety of formats, and we're happy to help. And if you look at our website now, we already have a great deal of material digitized. And so, even while we're stuck at home for the foreseeable future, there's a lot of ways to engage with our collections.
Thank you. That's great. Yes. So just a reminder, you do not need to sign up again in order to watch the next 2 weeks. And if you're unable to join us live, you will receive an email with the video and some of the resources that we talked about today. Last week, it took the video a while to process, and then there were problems because of the sound. So we didn't share all the Q&A last week, but hopefully this week we have everything set up appropriately and you'll receive that email at some point. Tell all of your friends about it. The more the merrier. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.